This is Saudi Arabia. Perhaps no other country faces a future filled with such immense uncertainty. The nation is confronted with countless challenges that it must overcome one by one to survive. And so far, the reason they have endured all this is solely because they control the oil the world has depended on for the past century. But now, the world is beginning to phase out its dependence on it. This country is almost entirely defined by its control of oil. In 2018 alone, the oil industry accounted for 87% of the Saudi government's annual budget, 90% of national export earnings, and 42% of the national GDP. The reason is that Saudi Arabia currently controls about 1/4 of the world's proven oil reserves, ranking second in the world, just behind Venezuela. But unlike Venezuela's oil, which is low quality, difficult to extract, and expensive to produce, Saudi reserves, while slightly smaller, are shallow, high pressure, and extremely easy to extract. The cost is extremely low and it's easier to refine. This is why, for decades, Saudi Arabia was the world's largest oil producer. Currently, it ranks second in the world, just behind the United States, with Russia following closely. These three nations are known as the Big Three of global oil production. No other country comes even close. Combined, they produce about 40% of the world's oil. But the US has a population of 332 million, and the vast majority of its oil is used for domestic consumption, not for massive exports. Thus, the US is only the world's 14th largest oil exporter. Saudi Arabia's population is only about 1/10 that of the US. Yet its oil production is almost equal. Domestic demand cannot consume it all, leaving a massive surplus for export. This makes Saudi Arabia the world's largest oil exporter. And oil still meets about 1/3 of global energy consumption. It is this simple logic that has given Saudi Arabia immense geopolitical influence over the past century, because they can provide more oil than any other nation. And they have the greatest power to influence global prices. Saudi Arabia is not only the top exporter, but also possesses the world's largest spare capacity. Spare capacity in the oil industry refers to wells a country owns but is not currently pumping, which can be restarted quickly to ramp up production in a short time. Saudi Arabia holds the world's largest spare capacity, usually maintaining 1.5 to 2 million barrels per day in reserve. By rapidly activating this capacity, Saudi Arabia can quickly increase supply, flooding the global market with more crude oil, thereby driving prices down. Conversely, by shutting down more wells and expanding spare capacity, they can cut production fast, tighten global supply. For this reason, Saudi Arabia is often called the central bank of oil. With this leverage, Saudi Arabia exerts significant influence over nearly every country, including the most powerful, the United States. Even though the US now imports only a small fraction of its oil from Saudi, domestic gas prices in the US are still heavily affected by Saudi decisions. After the Russia-Ukraine conflict broke out in 2022, the West immediately imposed a series of sanctions, pushing Russian oil out of the market. This naturally led to a supply shortage and rising oil prices. Rising oil prices drive up costs and inflation across almost all industries, as nearly every production chain relies on oil. When costs rise, businesses must increase prices. So, after the conflict began, and global oil prices and inflation soared, the Biden administration asked Saudi Arabia to use its spare capacity, increase production, and release more oil into the global market to lower prices. and ease inflation. But Saudi Arabia did exactly the opposite. They repeatedly cut production, placing more wells into a spare state, teaming up with Russia to tighten global supply and push up oil prices. This allowed Russia to earn more from exports to fund the war, while also increasing inflation and gas price pressure in the U.S. By May, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency oil stored in underground caverns in Louisiana and Texas, had dropped to its lowest level in 40 years due to continuous use since the conflict started, returning to a low point not seen since 1983. Releasing reserves temporarily helped stabilize domestic prices, but the reserves were severely depleted before the November 2024 election. Washington had almost no other means to stop a price spike, unless they called Saudi Arabia again to request a restart of production, and Saudi Arabia would almost certainly demand something in return. This is a classic example of how Saudi Arabia uses its oil power to exert geopolitical influence. But the biggest challenge for Saudi Arabia in the 21st century is that its core power has a limited lifespan. One day, this power will vanish completely. As nations gradually shift away from oil, Saudi Arabia's advantage as the global oil central bank will diminish, but the transformation itself will be extremely difficult and full of uncertainty. To understand Saudi Arabia's future, one must first understand its origins, and how, without the early and lucky discovery of oil, the remaining sections continue the historical narrative. 129. Las 0 y 10 and 12.266. Las 0 y 10 and 17.666. The Nezde region, located in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, was sparsely populated. It was isolated from the world, separated by vast deserts and high mountains. Having nothing of value to the outside world, it received almost no attention. Yet, it was this extreme isolation that allowed an ultra-conservative form of Sunni Islam to gradually develop here. Such a place seemed unlikely to give birth to one of the modern world's great powers. But ultimately, it did. In the 18th and 19th centuries, two obscure families in the Nejd region formed an alliance. The House of Saud took charge of politics and daily governance, while the Al-Ashik family handled religious affairs. Joining forces, this alliance established the first Saudi state, which was eventually destroyed by the Ottoman Empire. In 1818, survivors reclaimed the ancient capital of Riyadh and founded the second Saudi state, which lasted until 1891. Due to internal royal infighting and attacks from the rival Al-Rashid family, the state finally collapsed. Surviving members of the House of Saud were forced into exile from Riyadh to neighboring Kuwait, losing their land and wealth. They were left with only a historical claim to that seemingly worthless land in Nejd, without the ambition of one young family member. The House of Saud might have faded into obscurity. The founder of the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In 1902, 27-year-old Ibn Saud led dozens of loyal followers from Kuwait to recapture Riyadh from the rival Al-Rashid family. This was the beginning of a decades-long journey across the Arabian Peninsula. At first, foreign powers paid almost no attention. In the early 20th century, the land of modern-day Saudi Arabia had a population of only about 2 million. They were mostly poor nomadic tribes. The struggle between two tribes on this land did not catch the eyes of major powers. But World War I changed the situation. The Al-Rashid family allied with the Ottoman Empire. Britain began providing weapons and funds to Ibn Saud, who opposed the Ottomans. Coupled with Ibn Saud's alliance with the ultra-conservative Wahhabis, he gained tens of thousands of fanatical and well-equipped fighters. This turned the tide of the war. By the early 1920s, the Najd region of the Arabian Peninsula had been completely conquered. But the conquest did not end there. After World War I ended and the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the Middle East, Britain supported the Hashemite family as monarchs of three new kingdoms: Iraq, Jordan, and Hijaz. However, relations between Britain and the Hashemites deteriorated rapidly after the war. Britain turned Jordan and Iraq into mandates and allowed Jewish settlement in Palestine. The Hashemite ruler of Hijaz refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Britain immediately withdrew its support and turned to support Ibn Saud and his expanding kingdom of Najd. With newfound confidence, Ibn Saud invaded the kingdom of Hijaz in 1924, conquering it completely within a year. By 1925, Ibn Saud controlled all the territory of modern-day Saudi Arabia, including the two holy cities. In 1932, Ibn Saud announced the establishment of a new kingdom, naming it the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia after himself and his family. He became the monarch, and the third Saudi state was born. But this newly born kingdom was plagued with problems from the start. The kingdom was built through decades of violent war and conquest. Many people in the conquered regions resented the ultra-conservative alliance between the Saudis and the Wahhabis. Shia Muslim minorities in the eastern province and near Yemen often felt religiously oppressed by the Sunni fundamentalist regime. Even the relatively moderate Sunnis in the conquered Hejaz region felt uneasy. Furthermore, the exiled and resentful Hashemite family still ruled neighboring Jordan and Iraq, maintaining a legal claim to the Hejaz region. To maintain stability, Ibn Saud married the daughters of all the conquered tribal chiefs. With 20 wives in total, he fathered over 100 children. Among them were 45 sons, 6 of whom would go on to rule the kingdom for decades. After the war, the new kingdom's finances were in poor shape. There was only a tiny tax base from a population of 2 million impoverished people. The only profitable asset Ibn Saud's kingdom held was control over the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina. However, the income from religious pilgrimages barely filled the national treasury. At the time, it seemed that Egypt or Iraq were more likely, given the Nile Valley and the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, to become the geopolitical powers of the 20th century Arab world, as they had long done throughout human history. But the discovery of oil changed everything. Earlier, neighboring Iran, Iraq and Bahrain had discovered commercial quantities of oil. Ibn Saud was convinced there was oil in his kingdom as well, but distrusting the imperialist and colonial tendencies of the British, he turned to the United States. In 1933, a year after the kingdom's founding, Standard Oil of California, which later became Chevron, was granted exclusive exploration rights. Just 5 years later, they struck oil for the first time at Dam No. 7 near the Persian Gulf. Standard Oil of California initially established a wholly owned subsidiary to operate Saudi oil, later named the Arabian American Oil Company, Aramco. Saudi Arabia eventually acquired the company in full, renaming it Saudi Aramco, the state-owned oil giant we know today. The content continues with the history of Saudi-US relations and regional conflicts. 240, 0 hours 20 minutes and 4 seconds. 666, 0 hours 20 minutes and 8 seconds. 732. However, Ibn Saud had many enemies. The British-backed Hashemite family still ruled over Iraq and Jordan. Domestically, many Saudis were dissatisfied with his and the Wahhabis' rule. Ultimately, the two leaders met in February 1945 on a ship in the Suez Canal. Roosevelt passed away just a few weeks later. Their agreement became the foundation of Saudi-US relations, which has largely continued to this day. The secular, Republican United States supported the autocratic, Islamic Saudi Arabia because both sides got what they needed. The US gained access to Saudi oil fields for itself and its allies, while Saudi Arabia received security guarantees from the US. This sparsely populated nation, with nothing but oil, knew it could not protect its oil fields or regime on its own, whether against internal dissent or external rivals. But backed by the world's most powerful nation, no one dared to easily challenge them. As time went by, the basic security for oil framework between the US and Saudi Arabia evolved, but the core remained unchanged. Ibn Saud passed away in 1953. His sons succeeded him as monarchs one after another. Subsequently, the world's largest offshore and onshore oil fields were discovered. Wealth began to pour into the kingdom. But the era of true wealth came after the 1973 oil crisis. After Israel defeated the Egyptian-Syrian coalition in the Yom Kippur War, OPEC imposed an oil embargo on Israel's main supporters. Saudi Arabia participated briefly. Global oil prices quadrupled, remaining high for the next decade. The century-old alliance between the House of Saud and the Wahhabis kept the state under ultra-conservative Sunni values, while dissatisfaction among Shia and moderate Sunnis could have caused unrest. Oil revenue allowed the government to buy the citizens' loyalty with massive welfare. Saudi Arabia essentially became a total welfare state. They do not collect any taxes. The government subsidizes healthcare, education, food, water, oil, and electricity, nearly every basic need. In exchange, citizens must accept and recognize the absolute legitimacy of the House of Saud's rule. In the late 20th century, U.S. oil production declined, while Saudi production continued to rise, briefly surpassing the U.S. to become the world's top producer. America's commitment to protecting strategic Saudi oil supplies deepened. By 1991, nearly one-third of U.S. oil imports came from Saudi Arabia. Protecting Saudi Arabia became a must at all costs. As more Westerners entered Saudi Arabia for oil development, the conservative Wahhabi establishment grew increasingly uneasy with their presence. In 1979, the tension finally boiled over. Hundreds of armed religious extremists stormed Mecca, seizing control of the holy city. They condemned the king for desecrating the faith by westernizing the nation. One of Islam's holiest sites turned into a weeks-long military siege. Saudi security forces engaged in fierce battles with the militants to reclaim control. This was the first major direct challenge to the House of Saud's legitimacy. Since the kingdom's founding in 1932, the royal family responded by aligning even closer with Sunni Wahhabi religious leaders and tightening religious laws. All previous social reforms were reversed, cinemas were banned, and women were removed from media and newspapers. Dress codes for women became stricter, and religious police increased patrols to enforce the new rules. For the next 40 years, Saudi Arabia became one of the world's most theocratic and autocratic regimes. The royal family used strict Sharia law to cement their legitimacy in the eyes of domestic ultra-conservatives. But this domestic religious radicalization eventually brought more trouble, even jeopardizing relations with their protector, the United States. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were born out of this extreme religious environment in Saudi Arabia. In 1990, when it seemed Saddam's Iraq might invade Saudi Arabia, bin Laden proposed to the king that his battle-hardened forces from the Afghan-Soviet War protect the kingdom. The king refused. Instead, he allowed the U.S. to station hundreds of thousands of troops in Saudi Arabia to deter the invasion. the king as the custodian of the two holy mosques, allowing U.S. troops to station there. Infuriated bin Laden and al-Qaeda. In 1995, bin Laden declared the Saudi king an apostate. The war between al-Qaeda and the Saudi kingdom has continued ever since. Bin Laden himself was a Saudi citizen, and many al-Qaeda members were from Saudi Arabia, including 15 of the 19 hijackers in the September 11th attacks. This has always been a painful point in Saudi-US relations. Additionally, external threats to the Saudi royals increased sharply. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution broke out in neighboring Iran. A Shia regime came to power, becoming Saudi Arabia's greatest arch-rival. The two countries entered a long Cold War. The Iranian Revolution overthrew its own monarchy and intended to export the revolution to all monarchies in the Islamic world, aiming to overthrow kings, including those in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. When the U.S. invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam in 2003, everything changed. Saudi Arabia strongly opposed this decision, knowing that with Saddam gone, Iran would take the chance to export its revolution to Iraq. Iranian influence quickly entered Iraq, establishing militias among the Shia population. To stop Iran, Saudi Arabia began funding Sunni militias in Iraq. The first proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia began. In 2011, the Arab Spring swept through the Arab world. Citizens took to the streets demanding change. Long-standing regimes in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen were overthrown. Civil wars broke out in Libya, Yemen, and Syria. Fearing the revolution would reach them, the Saudi royals began purchasing billions of dollars in American weaponry. The conflict reached a boiling point on the island of Bahrain. While 60% of its population is Shia, its monarch is Sunni. Revolutionary Iran claimed Bahrain as its lost province, asserting that the Shia majority was being oppressed. In 1986, the King Fahd Causeway was built to connect Bahrain with Saudi Arabia. While it promoted trade, it also served as a route for Saudi tanks to enter Bahrain quickly if the monarchy was threatened. If Iran succeeded in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia's national survival would be directly threatened. Bahrain is right next to Saudi Arabia's eastern province, where nearly all of its oil reserves and facilities are located. If the revolution spread from Bahrain to the eastern province, the entire Saudi oil industry and the monarchy itself would collapse. This was unacceptable. Thus, when an uprising broke out in Bahrain in 2011, Saudi troops crossed the bridge to help suppress it. Saudi Arabia then supported rebels in Syria to overthrow the Assad regime. If successful, Iran would lose a core part of its land corridor reaching the Mediterranean. This corridor allows Iran to supply weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza to Saudi Arabia. It felt like Iran was surrounding them. Proxy wars spread to Libya and reached a climax in 2014 when Houthi rebels seized Yemen's capital. A Houthi-controlled Yemen meant a radical, pro-Iranian Shia force on Saudi Arabia's 1,300 kilometers southern border, controlling the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait. To prevent this, Saudi Arabia formed a U.S.-backed military coalition and invaded Yemen in 2015. Since then, the war in Yemen has evolved into one of the 21st century's worst humanitarian disasters.